Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Welcome to Relationships Inside Out, where today we're going to talk about what are you doing with your life?
We're going to offer a series of questions that we give to our clients, a series of prompts to think about, am I really living the life I want to live? Or am I living a life out of inertia, out of circumstance, convenience, whatever it might be?
And these are important to reflect on, even if you feel like you've been here, you've changed things, and you're living the life that you want to live. It's important to reflect back because maybe things have changed, and things do change. So what are some questions?
I like to start with maybe the positives, because that helps kind of like, I don't know, when we're happy, when we have dopamine, we're more open to the hard questions. So what makes you happy?
Yeah.
What do you enjoy doing? What are your passions? Then the other side of that is, are you pursuing those things, right? If I say self-care makes me happy, do I practice self-care every day? Do I get alone time? Do I practice yoga, the things? Or do I just say that makes me happy and I never actually do it?
And even further is, have you identified what self-care really means? One thing with clients, and especially the ones who experience depressive symptoms, I usually talk about behavioral activation and doing things that help lift your mood. You really have to go do the things that make it positive. And then when you ask them, what are you doing? It's not things that actually bring that for them. So reflecting on what is it that makes you happy? What fills your cup and brings you joy? And maybe, depending if you are experiencing depression, you might do it and not feel super great right away. But over time, right, as we've talked about in previous episodes, you can't wait for the feeling to go do those things. You do those things to get the feeling.
And what makes you happy? I want to punctuate the word you. I'm not just doing the things that make my partner happy or my mom happy or whoever. I'm doing the things for me, right? I live or I hope everyone lives in a slightly selfish state, not like the asshole that takes the parking spot selfish state, but like advocating for my needs, myself, creating space for that.
So, and I do want to talk, I think the biggest reason this came up for you and I to do this episode was that happiness report that came out in America was like not even in the top 20 anymore.
It's bad.
And so one thing that you and I have talked about before is, what are people actually doing to chase happiness? Because and this is why it's an important question, is because culture tells us what's happy. It's the cars, it's the money, it's these things that actually research does not point as to being happiness or bringing happiness. So it's really important, I think, to reflect on the questions we're talking about, to see where you're at, to see how you can actually bring happiness to your life.
Paired with happiness too is contentment. Am I content? Do I feel positive regard for where I'm at in life? Content doesn't mean no change, no growth, no action, but am I always chasing that next thing? Am I always chasing that next high, that next car, that next big promotion, that whatever? Or can I be content with where I'm at with the idea of change still being part of it?
And it goes to this concept of hedonistic adaptation. It's this idea that we have a baseline of happiness. And you can usually tell if something's going to bring happiness or not based on how long it lasts. Yeah. So we've talked about this in previous episodes. So you might buy a car. You will be happy for about 6 months. And then it's just at most, right? And people even who win the lottery, they've shown have come back after about 2 years. What's sustainable? And things like relationships, living a life that actually is in accordance with your values, as we talked about before. So a lot of these questions we're going to ask are around that. Like, what are you doing to foster these things? What are your values?
Do you know what they are?
Most of us don't. There's a list. There's a ton of them. I didn't even know some of those were considered values.
And I want to punctuate your values again, right? That's going to be true of any of these questions. Sometimes when I say like, oh, my values are X, Y, and Z, if I actually pause, are they actually my values? Or are they the values that my parents told me I was supposed to have, or my partner has, or my best friend has? What are yours? When you get down to brass tacks, what defines you in those values? And get real about them.
And one thing to think about with the values, and we've talked about this before in a previous episode, and I want to bring it up again, is that a value that you need to feel good, and it's more of a response of that, or is it something that you actually truly value? And here's an example. Before, I would say I would have valued safety. I was like, I value safety. And then I reflect on it and like, that's a response to trauma from war.
Sure.
And you're like, well, that's more of something I need to reduce my stress around it? So is that truly a value when I break
Great
it down?
question.
So really think about that when you're looking at your values, is what function does that serve if I engage in that?
Another question I ask people is about priorities. So in terms of what are you doing with your life? Priorities is a huge part of this. And I talk about like our real priorities versus our idealized priorities. So ideal for me would be like God in order. God, my husband, my children, my family. Then it goes on to like philanthropy work, that kind of thing. Is that really what I'm doing? If I look at the spread of my life, of how I spend my week, my effort, do I really give God the greatest priority? No. Do I give my husband greater priority than my kids, than my phone, than my work? Often no, right? And so exploring that within yourself, and I have clients write the two separate lists, idealized versus actualized. What are my ideal priorities? And then how do I actually distribute my time, effort, attention?
And because I like what you're saying is this idealized, and all of us had this idea of where we wanted to be with our lives.
Yeah, I'd be a millionaire by now with a private island.
So things that don't bring happiness, money, or it does up to a certain point, right? But like we had an image of where we wanted to be, and things change, things happen. Is that image still something you want? Is it still something you're shooting for? Because quite frankly, any of us could make that decision to say, nope, I'm on this track. I'm going to change it. Even if that means a career change. This is where you get choice and power, right? You get one life. Is it just skating by and being like, you know what, this is just how it ended up for me? Is that okay for you?
You have to choose it. I mentioned in our last episode, choice. Just because things don't change doesn't mean you didn't choose that, right? You choose to be active or passive. When you start to phrase it as, I am choosing this mundane, boring lifestyle. I am choosing to remain in this unfulfilling partnership. I am choosing to hate my life. Ooh, that can be jarring. Rather than saying, well, it's not my fault, or it's convenient, or I feel sorry for this person, whatever. When you put I choose in front of it, now it becomes active.
Yeah. Or it's too late in my life. I've already.
Oof.
That's a big one.
It's a big one. And it breaks my heart. It's never too late to choose something different, to choose your happiness.
And a question I think is important in this that I would ask clients is, are you willing to be uncomfortable for a little bit to work towards
Excellent question.
being happy? Because if it requires change, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be scary. And there's going to be a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. And we don't like uncertainty. This is why a lot of us end up in just staying. Well, you know what? I'm fine here. Fine. That's great.
Not going to take the risk.
Not going to take the risk. And maybe that's what you decided for yourself and you're just content with that. And some people actually, which I find fascinating because it's not my philosophy, they're okay sucking up like a crappy job because then that funds their happiness. For me, I can't do a job I don't like.
That's my husband.
Yeah, I cannot do that. I don't have that tenacity. And I feel like that's a strength that I don't have.
I don't have it.
But for me, it was always, I want to do a job that I like, because I've seen people struggle of providing a roof over someone's head. And that was like not something that I saw as that I wanted to engage in because of what I saw it doing to them. But granted, that's not the only philosophy to go by. You could say, I'm fine with my shit job. That's not a question I need to ask myself. It's, am I using the funding from the shit job I'm saying to actually put it towards the things that make me happy? Kind of going back to that. It's idealized, but are you actually putting it into action?
I gained some wisdom from a client where they talked about peaks and valleys. And we all live for the peaks. But if you, especially for those who are in Colorado, you know, at the very top of the peak, life isn't sustainable. There aren't trees. There is no organism that's living up there because it's not sustainable. Look at Everest, right? Maybe it was you who told me. And okay, then I'm pretty sure I've got it spot on with the client. And if we're always living for the peaks, that's not sustainable. Organisms cannot live at the peaks. They cannot live for the peaks. So we have to be willing to also enjoy the journey to get to the peak, just like in Everest. And we have to be able to sit with the valleys, the beauty of the valleys, the perspective we get to look up, right? And there was so much wisdom in that of, if we're only living for those peaks, they're not sustainable. Your happiness won't stay. That brand new car, that private island, that whatever, that happiness is temporary. It is finding happiness while I'm on the trail, while I'm in the hike.
In the process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I like that because if all you lived with is the peaks, that becomes your norm, and it no longer will bring that happiness because there's not disparity to bring it relativeness.
Truth.
A good example is weather. People are like, I just want to live in a sunny place. You're like, that's great. You go there. And it's always
Then
sunny.
you moved to Florida like we did. And I'm here to tell you. We
Well,
moved out of Florida for a reason.
we were in the armpit, but so take, for example, like seasons.
Yes.
How do you appreciate spring without winter?
Truth.
Or how do you appreciate, if you love winter, how do you appreciate that without the whole, like the really hot summers? And so there's
Yes.
relativeness. Like I was living in San Diego, and you'd ask people, well, how often you go to the beach? Like, oh, I don't know. And we take it for granted because it's like, oh, it'll be a sunny day tomorrow. Oh, it'll be a sunny day tomorrow. And there's not relativeness to give that. And so what disparity you bring in your life to get that perspective of that happiness.
Yes.
And I love what you said about sitting with the valleys, because sometimes all we need for happiness is to be okay to learn how to manage the stress with the uncomfortable valleys. And if you can tolerate stress, which to me, this is one of my own personal goals, is how do I tolerate distress in the uncomfortable moments? If I can do that, that would bring happiness for me.
And think about like when you feel yourself feeling more normal after a hard period, when you feel things evening out, feeling better, the high you get from that, right? It doesn't have to be the peak, my happiest moment. It's simply, wow, look at that valley that I overcame. Look at that hard moment. And now look at me going again. Look at me climbing and feeling empowered again. But like you said, I need that variability to have something to compare it to. You can't have joy without sorrow or pain. You can't.
Yeah.
And accepting both as our reality is important here.
I don't want to.
I want only joy.
Another important thing that I found through our work and our studies is that outcomes, if you're only focused on outcomes, it most likely probably won't bring you happiness.
Yes.
Unless you enjoy the process for the outcome, and the outcome isn't the sole thing you're looking for. A good example is this is, I want to make this much money, and you're so focused on that you just break yourself to the bone to get there. But you're not doing anything you love, versus somebody who's like, that's my end goal, but I want to do it this route where I actually enjoy it, and they almost forget about it, and then they're at their goal.
Sure.
So when you have hard outcomes, it's dangerous too, because if you don't meet them, and oftentimes our outcomes are unrealistic, we feel failure and we get discouraged. And this is where despair, discouragement, depression come from.
And like, I've been guilty of this. I think about our PhD experience together, where I was so outcome driven that cool, I hit that outcome. As soon as I hit it, what do I do now? So I'm going to pick another outcome. I don't even celebrate what I've accomplished because I'm now moving to the next one.
Yeah.
Right. I don't get the joy along the way because, well, I hit it. Now what?
So I'm going to gaslight the PhD program. That was them. That wasn't us.
It's their fault.
It's their fault. This is the culture they bred. Just kidding. I think it was a great experience. Extremely knowledgeable people there. Extremely knowledgeable in our field. Incredible research coming out of there. Very, very smart people. So this is more humor. Like I don't like they do.
Yes,
work, so
they do phenomenal work. But for me, like learning that about myself, learning how to grow in those experiences, learning how to appreciate the struggle. Not all parts of our experience were great, but how can I look back at that and say, man, I'm really glad that happened. I'm really glad we had those challenges. I'm really glad I completed my dissertation, which I thought never could I have completed.
Yeah, I mean, there's for my track, I was all academia, right? I had the research. I was working on an F award that was pretty close, and just had to work on it more if I stayed in. I was already teaching at a university, and I was working in another department at another university, had connections. But then something happened. COVID came. Funding was lost. The hiring process looks much different now. They have different criteria for what they're looking for. And I was faced with the reality of I can't go to this outcome that I've been working 10 years for. I can't reach it. And so I had to shift. And so luckily for me, that wasn't my only outcome. I always kept in the back of my head of maybe I just go clinical. Maybe I just live that life. But if it was, I would be devastated if that was my only.
And that's tough, right? But it's that question of what are you doing with your life?
Well,
is this satisfying me? I think, I wanted to go academia and I didn't get the job I thought I was a shoo-in for. Looking back, that was a godsend and a half.
Yeah.
And because I would have been 2 years deep at most and been like, what am I doing with my life? This is stressful. I'm underpaid. It doesn't feel good for me. It takes away from my family, right? These kinds of questions when we're considering our life, am I really living who I want to be?
Yeah.
Right? I have little kids. Do I get time with them? Do I see them? I think I've shared on here before. There was a point when I was working and I was seeing like 12 clients a day. I mean, a lot. And my very astute at the time 5-year-old came to me, or 6-year-old, and she said, Mom, I miss seeing you. And it was like, ugh, because she said, Mom, you work a lot.
I think Chris told her to say that. I'm just
Like
kidding.
makes me emotional, right?
Chris told her to say that too. I'm just kidding.
No, he liked the paycheck.
Oh,
But it was that moment of, oh my God, like I am missing my children because I work till 8 o'clock at night
yeah.
and I start at 8 in the morning. So I didn't see them at all, right? I was working the second that they left in the morning. They were only up for 20 minutes until I was putting them to bed. I would finish, go tuck them in, and rinse, repeat. And it was sobering to have, and Greg can see, like I'm emotional just recounting it, because it was that moment of, whoa, like, is this the life I want? Do I love my job, but is it more important than my kids, my husband? Is the money worth it? No, absolutely not.
Yeah. A lot of important questions there. Is what I'm doing more important than X, whatever that value is?
Is it worth it? The
title of this episode is, what are you doing with your life? But there has to be 2 follow-up questions that I think are extremely important.
Yeah.
What do you want to do with your life?
Yes.
And why do you want to do that?
Beautiful questions.
So the want, this is where you get to be a kid again. I don't care how old you are. You can change at any time.
Yep.
So what do you want to do? And granted, is it realistic?
Sure.
And think of these ideas. And then you want to get deeper and say, why? So am I only doing this because of the status and the culture that was in, like, for example, let's just go with academia. Everyone is like, oh, you're a researcher, you're a professor. Is that why you're going there for? Like, what about it?
Clout, ego.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. But what about this outcome would bring you happiness? Why do you want to do that? And it's very hard to reflect. There's a lot of cloud in our head and narratives that we've been told of, like, this is what success looks like.
Or families, you will be a lawyer because that's what we are as family.
Yeah. And so you have this idea of what success looks like. And if that's your idea of success, it's really hard to question it and being like, is this really going to bring me happiness? Well, success does not correlate to happiness because we all have different ideas of what success means.
And it's fleeting. You will not be successful every day of your life.
And as you said before, your success, you found the outcome, you met it, and then you had the
chance. Now what?
You were on the next one.
Yeah.
But the why question is really asking yourself, what is this really about? Is this my insecurity that's driving this? Is this what my family's pushing me to? Is this what friends are pushing me to? Is this what
desperation?
What's happening? Is this what Disney and all the media have pushed me to want to go do with my life? Because this is what, this is what is magical. Really think about where your narratives are coming from. That's the why piece of this. And I think it's a helpful framework to start with. And when you ask the why, a lot of the stuff we've said earlier about values come up. Oh, because my value's in there. Is it?
Priorities.
Is it? Yeah. And say you do want this. How do your other values fit in there? So maybe it does fit a value.
Yeah.
Are you sacrificing others? Even though it meets one, is it sacrificing others? So for you, it's like, oh yeah, this is my job. I'm doing something I love. Great. Did that sacrifice another value of family? And so that's another question maybe that you follow up with the why is then, okay, I agree that this is what I want to do and why, but then what are the costs?
Or the value of mental health.
Yeah.
I can look back now and say, like, that was a terrible choice on my mental health. In the throw of it, did I see it? No. Right. And so it's taking that pause. On the flip of the good parts, it's also what challenges are you experiencing? What support do you have to overcome those barriers or challenges? So when you're exploring, what does my life look like? How do I want it to look? Okay, what gets in the way? And what am I going to do about it?
And that could be people are getting in the way.
Yes. Yep. Or the lack of people, right? Maybe I've shut myself in too much and now I don't have the support I need, the connections I need. But the inclusion of certain people, maybe they're really negative, maybe they're pressuring, they are critical of me. So I feel like a failure. I feel like I can't approach something with confidence. It's a hard question to look at the flip side of that voice in our head that says, I can't, I shouldn't, I'll fail.
Well, I mean, and not even just the voice in our head, people will say that.
They will, and it's so gross.
And I think what you're saying is also important follow-up. All these questions are important. How about that? But what you're saying is, so say you have decided, you've gone through those 3 questions and you figured out the why, and now you're like, these are my values, there's not much cost. And you say, what do I need to get there? and who can support, or what support do I need? Because there's some people who won't. And I think this comes up a lot. And I think it's a very easy example to give is somebody all of a sudden says, I want to be an actor. And you're like, you know how hard that is? Like, what are you doing? Well, how are you going to do that? That's not supportive. You're going to get that a lot when somebody's trying to follow their dream. And the individual I'm thinking of did not give a shit what anyone thought.
Good for
And
them.
they're killing it.
Yes.
But how easy would it have been
Yep.
to be trapped by those narratives and the crushing down? So you really have to evaluate your support as you're talking about, because that's going to get you there. That's going to help lift you up to even want to do those things.
And support even within ourselves, not even just extrinsic, but intrinsic.
Yep.
Do I need to work on my confidence? Do I need to work on my self-esteem, my perseverance, my
performance anxiety?
Yes. My ability to say, like, I'm going to do this whether other people like it or not. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That voice inside of you can be a major proponent of which way your life goes. If I feel like I'm not good enough, my life might go this way, might go to the left. But if I say, like, no, I'm confident, I know what I love, it could take a whole different turn.
And I love that self-exploration of like who I am and what are maybe my own barriers to be happy. I mean, all this stuff has to be looked at. If you owned a company, you'd be looking at all these things for your overhead and your profit margins. Why aren't you doing that for yourself?
Absolutely. And that's so funny you say that. I think about in terms of money. Money for us is more concrete. We are more apt to protect it. We are more apt to be hungry for it. But when we talk about our own like self-worth, self-fulfillment, we're less hungry for it. And yet it's a much more valuable commodity.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, my mind went to maybe it's a little dolphin or kind of like going off of the odd thought right here. But I think about cultural differences.
Yes.
And what comes up for me is our concept of time here in the United States and maybe Western culture, but time is money.
Truth. And
we've also been raised through an education system that's based on behaviorism, where a lot of our rewards are external. So looking at ourselves and what are our internal kind of rewards for happiness and are very hard to think of because that's not normal based on how our culture conditions us. And so time has always been money. Time is always about productivity. And we know we're doing well when we get rewarded externally. So we always search for these external things for rewards because that's what we're taught. But I think a very interesting thing that comes up, and they talk about this in the book 4,000 Weeks as well. It's like 4,000 Weeks.
I've never heard of it.
Time management for mortals.
Ooh.
But it's very interesting. The thing that I love about it is this idea, and this is more broadly speaking, but is what are you, what is time for you in your life? And they talk about that we've gotten to a point that even the time that we say self-care or relaxing, we even have to be productive in those moments.
Done it.
That's not happiness. That does not bring happiness when you have to feel productive, even the times when you're supposed to relax.
And if not productive, then guilty.
And I think about those of us who look at clocks. So how much stress do you get when you have clocks, and what are you doing with your time? And what would it be like if you stopped looking at a clock when you can? You
know how jarring that is? Greg, you know this. I have a clock here at every single room, bathrooms included, of my house.
So think about how important we've put emphasis on time in our culture, and how do you get happiness when you have this time just beckoning in the back of your head of like, I want to be happy. Oh, but in 30 minutes, I need to do X. And it's like, okay, so, and then and in this book as well, they talk about, okay, I think they call it telic activities. But like activities where you can just be, and you're not doing it for anyone, for any purpose. Like just sit alongside the river. You're not doing it to appease anybody. You're not doing it to resolve your own anxiety. You're doing something because it's a value, and that's something that's important to you, not because it brings you joy, but just like that's true to who you are. Very hard to think about. Very hard for us to get out of this concept of what time means in our Western culture here in the United States of time is money. And when you're not being productive, there's a lot of guilt we have on ourselves that's put on it because of that narrative. And it's like, how do you escape from this concept of time? Remove it and think about it differently and how you want to use it.
Got my wheels turning.
And what I love about this is sad, but what I love that came out of COVID not good in of itself, is it forced people to really think about time. They're like, wait a second, I'm at home, I'm still meeting my criteria for work, and I get more time with my family. What the hell have I been doing in my life? Yes. And that question, now that COVID's kind of dissipating, apparently, don't stop asking that question. Don't stop fighting for time and how you want to use it, and redefine that for yourself. Not allow what Western culture has done, because time in itself, and this comes from the book too, is especially in the Industrial Revolution, it was like time is productivity. We're creating behaviorism so you can work on the assembly lines. And we need this in time, and time is profit, right? This is like what we've kind of been bred to do. But before that, what was time?
You've got my wheels like turning. Because I even think about it as a family unit, even on like a Friday. Okay, no school the next day. I will be like, oh, this feels so good to watch a movie as a family. Oh, honey, it's 8 o'clock. Turn off the movie. It's bedtime. There's no need for that.
No.
But in my brain, 8 o'clock means it's bedtime, because if we don't go to bed, then the next day they're going to be cranky. Then we won't be as productive. Then, and the ball keeps rolling, right? It's fascinating, this timepiece.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be thinking on this all day.
And whether people think it's important, that's fine. But I would challenge you to take a weekend where you don't look at clocks and you go by sunset, sundown, and you do whatever you want through that day. You don't put a schedule, and you just go with the flow.
Whew. I don't know if anyone else, but I'm feeling like this, like, but my clocks, Greg, it's fascinating. I've never thought about time is so powerful.
And I want to talk about it. And then what are you doing with your life? Because a lot of us think about our lives in the concept of, I need to get this goal by this time. No.
Or it's too late to do this because time has passed.
Exactly. Yeah. Really good point. And time is pretty much wrapped up into everything we think about and how we do things. And okay, maybe it's fine, but don't think about it in terms of productivity, right? What about time to do nothing? Time to, and I got clients that say this. They're like, yeah. I'm like, time to be a piece of shit. Because society thinks you're a piece of shit for doing nothing. And it's
but then we still put time parameters around it. Like, I will do self-care, but I'm going to set it until 2:30. And then at 2:30, my alarm will remind me I need to get moving.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the culture is time is money, and we have to pay attention to time, and we have to make money. Otherwise, we can't really exist.
Truth.
So to some extent, it has to be there. Appointments, things like that. That's fine. But why do we have to, like, I think about my son's bedtime. There's all these models out there of like, by 10 o'clock. And I'm like, he's asleep right now. And I'm not going to wake him up. I'm going to let him, this is close enough. We're just going to let him ride it out and see where he's at. And we're going to wake up at this time instead for ourselves. Like, why do we have to put a time on it? That creates so much anxiety as parents. And it's like, no, like, I'm going to let him be, like, I'm going to feed him within the 2-3 hour window. Whenever he feels it, I'm going to sense his cries, all that stuff. Right. But when I start putting a clock and an alarm on this stuff, anxiety.
It does. Ooh.
Stress.
Time's a big part of looking at how we are living our lives. What are we doing with our lives? Am I living by that? Am I living by standards that were superimposed upon me by culture, by my family? Good questions.
One way I think about it for myself is, what do I do where time escapes me? When I fly fish, I lose time.
That's us traveling. We rarely look at it unless we have somewhere like a reservation of something.
Yeah. And
no, we go based on what people feel. Yeah. Do you feel tired? Take a nap.
Yeah.
If you feel energized, let's go.
So this is interesting to bring up vacation. So I want to go off, maybe this is a digression. So I work with clients and they're like, I was on vacation in this island. We're going to move there. I'm like, okay, so let's explore this. I want you to think about living there and putting time constraints on your job. You're having a job there. You go to work 9 to 5. You still got to like cook and clean and do all the routine that you're doing here. I want you to take your routine here at home and put it there. Would you enjoy it as much? No.
Nope.
Because in vacation, guess what we're doing? We have no, other than the time we get there and the time we know we're leaving, unless you're like really anxious and people need to like schedule everything out. That's a whole different problem. But most of the time people go there and they're like,
to check out.
They're escaping from time, in my opinion.
Especially if you stay at like a resort, right? Because then someone is doing the cleaning for you. Someone is, maybe if you're at an all-inclusive, someone's doing the cooking for you. That's one reason we love traveling, right? Is it gives us that chance.
If we're privileged to travel.
Of course. Yeah. And when you come back from travel, how do you incorporate that back into your life, right? Because that's a peak. I can't live on that peak forever. I wish I could, but I can't. So how do I bring that back in, right? When we got back from DR in March.
Dominican Republic. We
felt so close as a family because we had just time together. So my husband and I did kind of like an assessment of how do we recalibrate as a household to be more connected? Yeah. How do we recalibrate as a household to meet our daughter's needs differently, to meet our own needs differently, to feel this sense of internal peace while also living life as we have to?
Yeah. And this is the beautiful piece about this question is what we're asking. there is no answer. The answer is what you want it to be. Just explore why it is your answer. And I think the escape, and this is anecdotal, and I'm just only putting this because this is for me, is what are the things you do where time escapes you? As things to look for. Like yours is travel, mine is fly fishing, which in summer can be a privileged sport depending on how much money someone wants to spend in it. But you may not have to go to those things that require that many resources, if you will.
Maybe it's even like a bath.
I got clients who puzzle and they escape.
Oh, puzzling. If you don't puzzle, you don't puzzle, right, Greg?
I do at times, yeah.
I'm a super
it's not
puzzler.
a hobby. Yeah.
There are times you'll be puzzling and you'll look up and you're like, holy shit, it's been 3 hours.
Yeah. So
you don't even realize it.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a good point, actually, because there are activities people can escape time in, but they leave it not feeling good. And that's like binging Netflix.
Doom scrolling.
So you do escape, but you're not fulfilled. So yeah, I think I'm glad you brought that up because time escapes you.
Good about my puzzling time.
Yeah, maybe you do. And that's okay.
Most of the time, unless I had something else to do.
But time escapes you. And when you're done, you're fulfilled.
Yeah.
We'll put that in there. That's important.
But at the core of this question, I want you to ask yourself, again, go back to realized versus idealized. What is the life you want? Are you doing that?
Why do you want that?
Right? Is this what you wanted? If not, what are you going to do about it? No one's going to change it for you. No one, quite frankly, gives a shit if you're happy, fulfilled, or any of that. That's up to you. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Well, this has been Relationships Inside Out, where today we talked about just questions of what kind of life are we leading and how do we want to shift it if we do. As always, if anyone has any questions, topic suggestions, anything like that, feel free to email us at relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks.